Harrison Ford happened to come across a woman holding two small children in her arms in the middle of a freezing winter day. As he approached, moved by compassion and a desire to help, he was left utterly stunned when he realized who she was. "You're not going to make it out here tonight," Harrison said, his voice low, breaking the silence like a twig snapping under snow. He hadn't meant to speak. Not at first. Not until he got closer. Not until he saw her face. She was huddled there on the sidewalk, back pressed against the brick wall of an old laundromat that had seen better decades. Her arms were wrapped around two small children, one curled up against her chest, the other clutching her sleeve and sobbing into a stained mitten. They were nothing but bones and blankets, their shivers barely hidden beneath layers of mismatched coats. But it wasn't the children that stopped Harrison in his tracks. It was her, Ariana Gomez. He hadn't heard that name in over 30 years, but his heart knew it like the lyrics to an old love song you never forget. Her face was hollow now, streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but still, undeniably her. The girl who used to laugh at the top of her lungs on the high school bleachers. The one who danced barefoot at prom when her heels broke. The one he used to write poems about and never dared to read them aloud. And now she was here, on the street, in the freezing cold. She didn't recognize him at first, not with the gray hair and the long wool coat, the leather gloves, the guarded way he stood with one hand in his pocket. But when he stepped closer and said her name, "Ariana?" She looked up. It was just a flicker, a blink. Then her eyes widened. "Harrison?" Her voice was cracked, barely audible, like a forgotten whisper. She looked away just as quickly, pulling the children tighter into her body. "Don't," she said, more to herself than him. "Don't look at us like that." He crouched down in front of her, not caring that the snow was soaking into his pants. He reached into his coat and pulled out a soft wool scarf, then draped it over the little girl's shoulders. She flinched at first, but didn't resist. "You can't stay here," he said gently. "Not with them, not like this. We're fine." Her chin trembled. "Please, just keep walking." But Lucas, the boy, he couldn't have been older than 5, let out a weak cough that sent a chill through Harrison deeper than the wind ever could. He was shaking like a leaf, lips tinged blue. No child should ever be that cold. No mother should ever have to lie about being fine. And still, Ariana looked at him like he was the enemy. "I don't want your pity," she snapped, though the fire in her voice barely covered the desperation. "You're not getting it," he replied, calm but firm. "This isn't pity. It's me, and you, and 2 kids who deserve a warm bed tonight." He stood up and shrugged off his coat without hesitation. "Put this on." "I said, put it on," he repeated, draping it over her shoulders. "You're freezing." She stared at him, stunned, and then quietly, almost reluctantly, she let him help her up. She didn't say a word as he called for his car, didn't argue when he picked up Lucy and held her against his chest, didn't protest as she gathered Lucas and followed him to the waiting black SUV with tinted windows and seats warmer than anything they'd felt in weeks. Inside the vehicle, the air was heavy. The heater blew softly. The driver didn't ask questions. Ariana held Lucas in her lap, eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. Her hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Harrison sat across from her, watching her in silence. The shadows played on her face, revealing every line that hadn't been there when they were 17. Her hair was darker now, tied back messily, with strands falling over her forehead. She looked exhausted, beyond tired, worn from the inside out. He couldn't help but wonder. What had happened? What had turned the girl with the fire in her eyes into this quiet, broken shell? He thought back to the last time he'd seen her, graduation day. She had been laughing on the school lawn, barefoot again, holding her cap like a trophy. She was supposed to go to California, to study theater, to live loudly. But clearly, something had derailed that dream. "Where are you taking us?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "My place," he said. "Just for the night." She turned her head sharply. I don't need charity, Harrison. It's not charity. Then what is it? He looked at her, long and hard. The years had changed so much, but her spirit was still there, buried under the frost and fear. It's what any decent man would do, he said finally, if he saw someone he once cared about sitting on a sidewalk with 2 kids and frost-bitten cheeks. She didn't answer, but he noticed the way she clutched his coat tighter around her body. The rest of the ride was silent. By the time they pulled into the gated drive, Lucy was fast asleep on Ariana's shoulder and Lucas had stopped coughing. Harrison helped them out of the car, leading them through the stone path to the front door of his house. It wasn't a mansion, not in the flashy Hollywood sense, but it was big, warm, and quiet. A place built more for comfort than for show. The house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum she had no business walking through. Ariana stepped into the room Harrison had shown her and stood perfectly still, one child asleep in each arm, her body stiff like it might shatter if she relaxed. The warmth inside the house wrapped around her, but it didn't sink in. Not yet. The walls were painted in soft tones, the kind that whispered wealth without shouting it. Everything smelled clean, like wood polish and lemon oil. There were framed pictures along the hallway, family portraits, business awards, even one of Harrison fishing with some old friend by a lake. The kind of life that was miles away from anything she'd known in years. Lucas stirred slightly, curling into her shoulder. Lucy's hand was still clutching a scrap of blanket so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Ariana swallowed hard. They'd been holding on to so little for so long. Now here they were, in a house with actual beds and a roof that didn't leak. But she couldn't make herself believe they were safe. Not fully, not yet. Harrison came in quietly behind her, carrying 2 small folded sets of pajamas and a fluffy robe that looked far too soft for a woman like her. "There's a bathroom just through that door," he said gently. "Hot water, towels. Thought they might need something clean to sleep in." Ariana nodded once, careful not to meet his eyes. "Thank you," she said, and her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. He placed the clothes down on the edge of the bed and didn't linger. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything." She waited until his footsteps faded before she let herself breathe. Her hands trembled as she undressed the children, washing their faces with a warm cloth from the bathroom sink. She tried not to cry when Lucy sighed in her sleep, curled up in blankets that didn't smell like mildew or dust. Lucas mumbled something soft, dreamlike. Maybe he thought they were back in a shelter. Maybe he thought this was all a dream. She didn't dare believe otherwise. After the kids were tucked in, Ariana stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked older than 35. Skin sallow, dark rings under her eyes. Her hair, once thick and wavy, was tied back in a brittle mess. She touched her face like she was trying to recognize herself. What would he think if he knew? She washed her hands in scalding water, holding them under until her fingers reddened. Then she put on the robe Harrison had left and sat on the corner of the bed, not moving, not blinking, just listening to the tick of the wall clock and the sound of her children's soft breaths. It had been a long time since she'd heard a house this quiet. Downstairs, Harrison poured himself another glass of bourbon and stood by the living room window, looking out into the dark. He didn't turn on the lights. The fire in the hearth was enough. Ariana was upstairs, in his house, after all these years, after all that had gone unsaid. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. He hadn't been looking for anyone, least of all her. But now that she was here, he couldn't ignore the ache in his chest, not out of romance, not some teenage fantasy. It was something else, something heavier, regret, maybe, or maybe just time. When he heard soft footsteps behind him, he turned around. Ariana was standing in the archway, arms crossed over her chest, robe pulled tight like a shield. She looked uncertain, vulnerable, but her jaw was set like stone. "I didn't want to bother you," she said quietly. "You're not," he answered. "Can't sleep?" She shook her head. "Too quiet?" He gestured to the couch. "Sit if you'd like." Mutty. She hesitated, then walked over and sat down at the far end, keeping her posture straight, her eyes on the fireplace. Harrison stayed near the armchair, giving her space. "This place is," she began, then trailed off. Her voice cracked slightly. "It's too nice. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is when you're not used to it." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." The silence settled again, but this time it didn't feel as awkward, just heavy. After a moment, he leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You were always strong, you know. Back then. People noticed it." Ariana gave a small, dry laugh. "Back then, that girl is long gone." He looked over at her, not unkindly. "I don't think so." She turned toward him, eyes tired but alert. "You don't know what I've been through." "I don't," he agreed. "But I know the fire's still there." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The fire cracked. The old clock on the mantel ticked twice. "You remember much from high school?" she asked suddenly. He gave a half smile. "Enough." "I always thought you were quiet," she said. "Always in the back, reading something." "I was usually reading you." Her head snapped toward him, startled. "Not in a creepy way," he added quickly. "Just, I noticed things. You had a way of lighting up when you talked about dreams. You never knew it, but it made people want to believe in theirs." She looked away. "I haven't talked about dreams in a long time. Maybe it's time to start again." She bit her lower lip, eyes shining but refusing to cry. "Why are you being kind to me, Harrison?" He looked at her for a long time. "Because I want to be, and because you need it." "Don't we all?" she whispered. He stood, slowly, not wanting to crowd her. "You should get some rest. We'll talk more when you're ready." Before she could respond, he turned to leave. But just as he reached the doorway, her voice stopped him. "Harrison." He turned. She looked down, fingers tangled in her robe sash. "I'm not ready to talk about the past. Not yet." "I know. And I might never be." He nodded. "Even if you never are, it won't change anything." And that, more than anything, made something inside her tremble. That night, Ariana didn't sleep much. She lay in bed with her eyes open, listening to the stillness. The children were safe. She was safe. And yet, a deeper storm still stirred inside her. The morning broke slow and gray, light barely spilling through the frost-kissed windows. The silence in the house still felt foreign to Ariana, but now it wasn't unwelcome. She sat at the edge of the breakfast nook, hands wrapped around a chipped mug that didn't match the rest of the perfect kitchen. Harrison wasn't there yet. The kids were still asleep upstairs, for once not jolted awake by cold, noise, or fear. That alone felt like a miracle. She'd hardly slept the night before. The comfort of the bed had done little to ease the weight pressing on her chest. It wasn't just the softness of the sheets or the fire-warmed air, it was being seen, being remembered. Harrison's words had followed her into her dreams like old ghosts refusing to leave. "Even if you never are, it won't change anything." He'd said it like he meant it. And maybe that's what scared her the most. She was so used to people walking away once they saw too much. But he had stayed, and now, it was time. Harrison walked in just after 7, hair damp, dressed in a sweater and slacks, holding 2 cups of fresh coffee. When he saw her sitting there, upright, tense, already waiting, he paused. "You're up early," he said softly. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. He placed 1 cup in front of her and sat down across the table without another word. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that lingered but didn't press, the kind that had room for breath. Ariana finally spoke, voice thin as thread. "I think I'm ready to talk." Harrison didn't answer right away. He just nodded slowly, gave her space, gave her time. She took 1 long breath and began. "I met Jake when I was 17. You remember him, don't you?" He didn't answer, but his eyes said yes. He was the kind of guy everyone watched, loud, charming, fast, with a joke. People called him Golden. She looked down at her hands. I thought I was lucky when he picked me. Her voice faltered, not from emotion, but fatigue, like the memory itself was exhausting. We dated most of senior year. I was stupid, Harrison. I thought he loved me. She chuckled bitterly, but when I told him I was pregnant, he didn't even wait for me to finish the sentence. He walked out, that night, and never came back. Harrison's hand, resting on the table, tightened. My parents were old school, Catholic, strict, judgmental. She swallowed hard. They gave me two options: terminate the pregnancy or get out. So I got out. The tears didn't come yet. Not yet. I moved in with an old friend, worked at a diner, did whatever I could to stay afloat. I was 20 when the twins came, and everything I thought I knew about exhaustion, about loneliness, it changed. She looked up, eyes glassy but dry. I begged. I starved. I walked miles with a stroller because I couldn't afford bus fare. I sold everything I had just to keep them fed. I've cleaned toilets, worked in warehouses, even stitched clothes in basements with no windows. I did what I had to do. She wasn't telling the story for sympathy. That much was clear. Her tone wasn't self-pitying. It was matter of fact. Honest in the way that only pain long accepted could be. They're the only reason I didn't give up. Lucas and Lucy. I don't care what happens to me, but I want them warm. I want them fed. I want them to sleep through a whole night without fear. Her voice cracked then. And for a long time, I didn't think that was possible. Silence again. Harrison's heart ached with a quiet fury. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words felt enough. He reached across the table instead and laid his hand gently over hers. You shouldn't have had to do it alone. Ariana didn't move. I know, she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two people sitting in the aftermath of a story long buried, now finally unearthed. Later that day, Harrison stood alone in his study, looking out the tall window as snow began to drift in slow spirals. Something inside him had shifted. He thought he'd known hardship. He'd lost friends. He'd failed deals. He'd weathered storms of every kind. But nothing, compared to the quiet war Ariana had survived, day after day, year after year, with no applause and no backup. She hadn't just survived. She'd kept two small children alive through it all. That kind of strength wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it left a mark. And in Harrison, it planted something else. A purpose. He called in a few favors. Contacted a close friend who ran a private learning center downtown. Quietly arranged meetings with therapists, tutors, and career counselors. He didn't want to push Ariana, but he wanted the world to be waiting when she was ready to step back into it. She deserved more than shelter. She deserved a path. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was once again wrapped in its gentle silence, Harrison found Ariana in the living room. She was sitting on the same corner of the couch, arms folded, staring into the fire. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside her, leaving space between them. You've had a long day, he said eventually. She nodded. I feel lighter, she admitted. But raw. That's normal. They sat for a while. Then she turned to him. I don't know what happens next. You don't have to. What if I can't go back to the way things were? I mean, I've forgotten how to be anything other than desperate. Harrison's voice was calm, certain. Then we don't go back. We move forward. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no shame in her gaze, only quiet wonder. The first day Ariana stepped into the learning center, her hands wouldn't stop trembling. It wasn't the cold, Though the morning air still bit through her coat, it was something deeper, like a hum in her bones. She hadn't walked into a classroom in over a decade, not since before the babies, not since the world stopped offering her anything more than survival. She stood outside those double glass doors, gripping the handles, the folder Harrison had given her clutched tightly against her chest. Inside, people her age and younger sat behind desks, talking, laughing, flipping through workbooks like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her feet almost turned back on instinct. But then she thought of Lucas, of Lucy. She thought of the way they slept so deeply now, the way Lucy had stopped grinding her teeth at night, the way Lucas had started humming again, just small things, like little bird song under his breath while he played with his toy trucks. And she stayed. The classes weren't easy. Not at first. She'd forgotten how to sit still for more than 10 minutes without jumping at every noise. She hadn't taken notes since she was a teenager. Her handwriting was shaky, and she stumbled over words like entrepreneur and soft skill. But she listened. She showed up. She asked questions. She tried. Every morning, before the kids were up, she sat at the kitchen table with flashcards and a cup of lukewarm coffee. Harrison always passed by quietly, sometimes refilling her mug without saying a word. Other times, he would just tap the counter once in silent encouragement. That quiet presence meant more to her than 1,000 speeches. Back at home, the air was different too. Lucas and Lucy no longer clung to her every second. They ran through the backyard now, laughing, kicking piles of leaves into the wind. Lucy had made friends with one of the neighbor's daughters. Lucas was learning the names of flowers. It was Harrison who taught them. Every afternoon, he'd roll up his sleeves and show them how to plant bulbs or sprinkle seeds. He wasn't loud or overbearing. He let them get dirty, let them ask 1,000 questions, let them name each flower bed something silly. "This one's Mr. Tickleflower," Lucas had declared once, pointing at a marigold. Harrison didn't correct him. He just nodded and said, "Then we better take good care of Mr. Tickleflower." He read them stories too, softly, at night, in that deep voice of his that turned even fairy tales into something real. They fell asleep easier those nights. So did Ariana. Sometimes when she watched from the kitchen window, she felt something loosen in her chest. Like a knot that had been there so long, she forgot what it felt like to breathe without it. One evening, after a long day of class and chores, Ariana stepped into the living room and found Harrison fast asleep on the couch, Lucy curled up on his chest like a kitten. The fire had burned low, casting soft amber light over them both. She didn't wake him. She just stood there for a long while, arms crossed, watching them, her little girl, and the man who, without ever asking, had filled a space in their lives that no one else had ever dared to. And something inside her, something small, scared, and fragile, started to believe again. They never spoke of love, not directly. There were no grand gestures, no lingering kisses or whispered declarations, but it was there. In the way Harrison never let the coffee pot go empty when she was studying late. In the way he taught Lucas to tie his shoelaces with more patience than any teacher ever could. In the way he looked at her sometimes, like he saw everything she was, everything she'd been through, and still chose to stand beside her. And she found herself smiling more, laughing even, laughing like she hadn't in years. Her voice was lighter. Her shoulders didn't curl in quite so tightly anymore. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it didn't rule her. And neither of them said the words. Because sometimes love doesn't start with, "I love you." Sometimes it starts with, "I'll be here," and means it. It started with a name on a napkin. Harrison folded it once, then again, and slid it into his wallet without saying a word. He'd spent weeks working through quiet channels, people who owed him favors, others who didn't, but respected him enough to make calls anyway. He never told Ariana. Not yet. She had made peace with not knowing, or at least she said she had. But Harrison hadn't, because every time he looked at Lucas, with those two serious eyes, or Lucy when she winced at sudden noise, he wondered how anyone could just vanish. How a man could walk away from them, from her, and sleep through the night. Jake Randall, still living in the same state, working at a car dealership in a suburb a couple hours north, clean record, no wife, no mention of children, like Ariana had never existed, like the past had been erased. But some ghosts, Harrison believed, shouldn't be allowed to rest so easy. He didn't call ahead, he just showed up. It was late afternoon when he stepped onto the lot, coat collar turned up against the wind. Rows of polished sedans gleamed under the overcast sky, but his eyes went straight to the man by the office door, talking loud, laughing like the world had never asked him to pay for anything. Jake looked up when Harrison approached, puzzled at first, then wary. His smile faltered. "You need help finding something?" Jake asked, cocking his head. Harrison didn't answer right away. He looked the man over. Older now, but not by much. Still trim, still tan, still slick enough to wear sunglasses in winter. "I'm not here to buy a car." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you—" "Ariana Gomez." The name landed like a brick. Jake blinked, just once. His smirk dropped and his shoulders stiffened. "What about her?" "You remember her?" Harrison asked, voice calm, measured. Jake snorted. "Yeah, I remember her. Why?" "You left her." Jake shrugged. "That was a long time ago." "She was pregnant." Another shrug. "Yeah. And I wasn't ready to be a dad." Harrison stepped closer. "She raised them alone. She lost everything. Slept on the street with those kids. And you? What? Sold Toyotas?" Jake's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. "Look, man, I don't owe you anything. I didn't sign up for any of that. She made her choices, and you made yours." Jake folded his arms. "You done here?" Harrison took a long breath. He had imagined this moment a dozen different ways. In some versions, he yelled. In others, he threw the first punch. But now, standing here, all he felt was a cold, heavy ache in his chest. "You're not even curious," he said quietly. "Not about the twins, not about how they turned out." Jake didn't flinch. "That's not my life, never was." And that was it. That was all Harrison needed to hear. The drive home was long and silent. Snow had started to fall, soft and slow. Harrison kept his hands on the wheel, jaw tight, replaying the conversation in his mind, over and over. Jake had no guilt, no regret, no sense of the destruction he'd left behind. Ariana deserved to know, not because it would fix anything, but because some truths had to be spoken aloud to be buried. When he walked into the house, the lights were dim. The kids were upstairs, their laughter muffled behind closed doors. Ariana was in the living room, curled on the couch, blanket over her legs, book resting on her lap. She looked up when she saw him. Something in his face must have said enough. She sat up, set the book aside. "You found him, didn't you?" He nodded. She exhaled slowly, eyes dropping to her hands. "What did he say?" "He said he wasn't ready to be a dad, said it wasn't his life. He didn't ask about the twins, not once." Ariana didn't cry. She didn't even blink. Her face was still, almost too still. "I figured," she said softly. "I think I always knew." Harrison sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat of her body under the blanket. "I wanted to be wrong," he admitted. "For your sake. You weren't." She leaned back, eyes fixed on the fire, the way the flames danced against the glass. "I used to imagine him showing up," she said, "knocking on the door, saying he was sorry, holding the kids, telling them he made a mistake. It helped, for a while, to think maybe I wasn't just some discarded girl." She paused. "But the longer time went on, the more I stopped needing that." Her voice was calm, but her fingers trembled slightly where they rested against her lap. "I don't want him back in our lives," she said. "I just wanted to hear it, out loud." You deserve that much. She turned her head toward him, eyes glassy, jaw tight. Do you think there's something wrong with me? She asked suddenly. What? I mean, why else would he leave like that? Why wouldn't he want them? Harrison didn't speak right away. Then he said firmly, There's nothing wrong with you, Ariana. Not a damn thing. She looked away again, but not before he saw the first tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it quickly. I don't want to cry over him anymore. You won't, he said. Not after tonight. Later, when she was alone in her room, Ariana sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone. She hadn't spoken to Jake in over 10 years. Not a text, not a call, nothing. Her hands shook as she typed the number Harrison had written down. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. She took a breath and left a message. You made your choice, she said, voice steady. I just wanted to say, don't ever try to undo it. Don't call. Don't show up. Don't look for us. You don't get to drop back in after disappearing. You don't get to rewrite this. Not now. Not ever. She hung up. It was done. In the hallway, Harrison waited. He didn't listen in. He didn't pace. But when Ariana stepped out of her room a few minutes later, her face pale, her body drawn but lighter somehow, he just opened his arms. And for the first time, she walked into them without hesitation. There were no words, just breath, just warmth, just the quiet kind of closure that takes years to earn. The days that followed were different, not louder, not busier, just softer somehow. The kind of quiet that feels earned, like a deep sigh after a long, hard cry. Harrison kept things simple. He didn't bring up Jake again. He didn't ask Ariana how she felt about the phone call. He didn't need to. He could see it in the way she stood straighter now, the way her eyes lingered longer on the sky, the way she laughed a little easier when Lucy danced barefoot across the backyard, or when Lucas ran to show her a very important rock. The weight she'd carried was still there. It always would be, but it no longer dragged behind her. Now it lived quietly beneath her ribs, like a scar she could live with. Harrison, for his part, just stayed close. He took the twins to the farmer's market on Saturdays, helped Lucas build a birdhouse that was more crooked than useful, let Lucy braid his hair while pretending he was Prince Daddy. Every morning, he made sure the coffee was ready before Ariana came down. And every evening, he lit the porch light before she climbed the stairs. It was never spoken out loud, but it felt like a family. One Sunday afternoon, golden light spread across the lawn like melted butter. The twins were chasing bubbles, their giggles floating higher than the bubbles themselves. Ariana sat under the old oak tree, toes curled into the grass, eyes closed to the breeze. Harrison watched from the patio, a smile tugging at his lips, his hands deep in his pockets like they always were when he was trying not to show too much. He'd known for a while now. It wasn't about timing, or planning, or doing it right. It was just time. The sun was just beginning to drop when he asked her to come upstairs. Roof again? She asked, eyebrows raised as she met him by the stairs. He nodded. Just us. She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes now. Okay. They hadn't been up there in a while. The last time, the air had been colder, heavier. But tonight, the wind was soft, the sky streaked in orange and lavender like something painted by a kinder hand. Ariana leaned on the railing, looking out across the neighborhood, the trees swaying, the distant bark of a dog, the faint hum of someone's radio drifting through the air. I used to dream about sunsets, she said after a moment, when we were staying in shelters. I'd sit by the little window and tell the kids we were looking at the same sky as someone who loved us. Harrison didn't speak. He just stepped beside her and pulled something small from his pocket, a square velvet box, worn smooth at the corners from sitting there too long. She turned when she heard the soft click, and for a second, she didn't breathe. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. I don't want to fix you, he said, voice steady. You're not broken. Her eyes filled instantly, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to rescue you or change your story. I want to be part of the chapters that come next." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no flash, just a soft shine, a promise carved in silence. "I want us to be a family, Ariana, for real. Me, you, the twins. I want to walk beside you, not in front, not behind, just beside." She stared at the ring, at the man holding it, and something in her, something afraid, cautious, bruised by years of disappointment, finally let go. Her voice cracked. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." Her hands trembled as she reached for the ring, but her answer was clear. She nodded once, then again, as tears rolled down her cheeks, quiet and grateful. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The wedding wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't anything like the first wedding Ariana used to dream about when she was 16 and still thought love was about lace and sparkle. This wedding was smaller, warmer. The ceremony took place under the oak tree just after noon, when the light was kind and the breeze smelled like spring. Lucas wore a little bow tie. Lucy carried flowers she'd picked herself, half of them weeds, but no one said a word. Ariana wore a pale blue dress that swayed when she walked, simple and lovely. Her hair was half up, loose curls catching sunlight like threads of gold. Harrison wore a suit that didn't quite fit right, too old, too wrinkled, but his smile made up for it. There was no preacher, no choir, no long guest list, just a few close neighbors, Mrs. Dalton the housekeeper, and the wind that carried their vows away like petals. They didn't exchange speeches. They exchanged looks. They didn't make promises. They made peace. And when Harrison placed the ring on her finger, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "Took me 30 years to get here. I'm not going anywhere now." She didn't say anything back. She didn't have to. That night, after the kids were asleep and the cake had been eaten down to crumbs, Ariana stood in the kitchen washing glasses, sleeves rolled up, bare feet on the cool tile. Harrison walked in behind her, drying his hands on a towel. "You don't have to do dishes on your wedding night," he said, leaning against the counter. "I know," she replied, smiling over her shoulder. "But it's a good kind of normal." He came up behind her, rested his chin on her shoulder, arms wrapped around her waist. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. She paused, letting the water run over her hands. Then she turned off the faucet and leaned back into him. "No," she said softly, "but I'm glad we did." He kissed her temple, slow, sure. They stood like that for a while, in the hush of a house that finally felt like home. And somewhere down the hall, a small voice murmured in sleep, followed by another. Their family, imperfect, unplanned, untraditional, was whole. It started with the smell of eggs. Ariana had always loved mornings, at least the kind she could choose. For years, they'd been filled with rushing, worry, fear of what the day might bring. But now, in this house where peace had finally settled, she let herself wake slowly. But that morning, the smell hit her like a wave. Not just unpleasant, wrong. She pressed a hand to her mouth and darted to the bathroom, barely making it before her stomach gave way. The nausea was fast, sharp, and then gone, leaving her breathless and shaking. She sat on the cool tile floor for a few minutes, hand resting just under her ribs. Her eyes closed. And then, quietly, cautiously, a thought came to her. No. She shook her head. No, it couldn't be. It took her 3 days to buy the test. Not because she didn't want to know, but because part of her already did. She could feel it. The fatigue, the queasiness, the odd stillness deep inside her. But she needed the truth to be printed in blue. When the test blinked back the word pregnant, her first feeling wasn't fear, it was awe. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, that little stick shaking in her hand, and let a single tear fall onto her knee. For the first time in her life, she was pregnant and safe. She waited until that evening, after the kids were in bed and the house had gone quiet, to tell Harrison. He was in his reading chair, half dozing over a newspaper, when she knelt down in front of him, placed her hands on his knees, and whispered, "We're not done building our family." He blinked, confused, then sat upright. "What do you mean?" Her smile was small, shy, but steady. "We're having a baby, Harrison." He stared at her for a beat too long. Then his breath hitched, and a stunned laugh burst from his chest. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I double-checked. Or maybe triple." He reached for her hands, pulled her gently up into his arms, and held her tight, so tight she could feel his heart pounding against her own. He didn't say much, just kept kissing the top of her head, whispering, "Thank you," over and over. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for trusting. Thank you for this new chance." The next morning, Harrison began rearranging the old guest room without asking. Ariana walked by the doorway and saw him measuring the windows, muttering to himself, a pencil tucked behind one ear like a man on a mission. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You're doing this already?" He looked up, unapologetic. "We've got less than 9 months. This isn't a one-man job." She chuckled. "I haven't even had my first checkup yet. Better early than late. This kid deserves a head start." She stepped into the room, touched the bare wall, then the windowsill. "What are we calling them for now?" He rubbed his jaw. "Miracle." She paused, then smiled. "Yeah, that feels right." Lucas and Lucy were told a week later during breakfast, over pancakes and strawberries. "We're gonna have a baby in the house," Harrison said, trying to keep his voice even. Lucy's fork froze mid-air. Lucas looked from one adult to the other, blinking. "You mean like a real baby?" Lucy asked. "A real one," Ariana said. "With tiny toes and loud crying and diapers and everything?" Lucy squealed. Lucas just grinned and nodded. "I want to teach it how to whistle." "It might take a few years," Harrison laughed. "That's okay," Lucas said. "I'll wait." The days became sweeter. Ariana glowed in ways she didn't know she could. Her steps slower, yes, but sure. There was a grace to her now, not forced, not performed, just a quiet knowing that life was unfolding as it should. She spent afternoons sitting by the window, rubbing her belly in soft circles, watching Lucas and Lucy chase each other through the yard. Sometimes Harrison would join them, pretending to be a grumpy bear or a space alien or the world's slowest race car. And when the sun would set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch, Harrison would sit beside her, hand over hers, both of them silently feeling for a tiny kick that had yet to come. One night, as the wind howled gentle outside and the fire crackled low, Ariana laid curled on the couch, head on Harrison's lap. He ran his fingers slowly through her hair, the rhythmic motion lulling them both into a kind of soft trance. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. "Yeah," he said finally. "Sometimes. About the baby? About everything." She turned slightly, looked up at him. "Even now?" "Especially now," he said, "because it all matters." She let the words sink in. Then she reached up, cupped the side of his face, and said, "It matters to me too." It was supposed to be routine. Ariana had brushed her hair that morning with care, slipped on her softest cardigan, the one with frayed sleeves Harrison refused to let her throw away. Her hand stayed protectively over her belly as she moved, her body slower now, but more at ease. She felt good, strong, even. Just another checkup, she told herself. Harrison had offered to go, but she'd told him no. Lucas had a school presentation. Lucy had begged him to stay and help paint her poster. "It's just a regular visit," she'd smiled. "We'll both be home for lunch." She didn't expect silence to follow her through the hallways of the clinic. Didn't expect the nurse to go quiet. Didn't expect the doctor's hand to hesitate mid-motion, just slightly, before resting against her wrist. Didn't expect the words that followed. They sat her down in a small room painted light yellow, like it was trying too hard to be warm. The doctor was kind, gentle, but that didn't soften the blow. "There's a complication," he said. "We found signs of a rare condition affecting the placenta and blood flow. The baby's not receiving everything it needs, and neither are you." Ariana blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. She glanced down at her belly, round beneath the cotton fabric. It had grown just enough that her old jeans didn't fit. "How bad is it?" she asked. The doctor's eyes softened with pity. "It's early still. We'll monitor it closely. But I want to be honest, Ariana. If it progresses, there may come a point where you'll need to make a choice. Your life, or the baby's." The words struck like a cold wind. Her hands tightened into fists in her lap. "We're not there yet," he added quickly. "But we need to be prepared." Prepared. How could anyone ever prepare for that? Harrison knew something was wrong the moment she walked in the door. She didn't say a word, just stepped into his arms and buried her face into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her without question, holding her tight, one hand at the back of her head, the other cradling her belly like it might shield them both from what he hadn't yet heard. When she finally spoke, it came in a whisper, barely a thread of sound. "There's something wrong with the baby." He didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, he led her to the couch, helped her sit, then knelt in front of her like a man saying prayer. "Tell me everything." She did, in halting words, between deep breaths, while staring at the wall like she couldn't face his eyes. And when she finished, silence followed. Heavy, crushing. Harrison's shoulders slumped as the weight sank into him. He looked up at her, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "They said you might have to choose?" he asked. Ariana nodded. "Not yet, but maybe." The words tasted like poison. That night, neither of them slept. Harrison sat beside the bed, in the same flannel shirt he'd worn since morning, his hand wrapped around hers like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. Ariana lay still, eyes closed, face turned toward the window where the moon hung low and solemn. The house, once so full of life, felt unnaturally still. He'd spent his whole life building things, companies, homes, futures, but there, in that moment, he had nothing left to build. He could only wait and pray. "I can't lose you," he whispered, voice raw. "I don't know how to do this without you." Ariana opened her eyes. "You'll have the kids," she said quietly. "They'll need you." His grip tightened. "They need you more." She turned her face to him. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice was steady. "If it comes to that, Harrison, promise me something." He shook his head, already knowing what she was about to say. "No. Promise me." He looked away, jaw clenched, then nodded. "Barely." "Take care of them," she continued. "Raise them with love, the way you've done since the day you stepped into their lives." "I can't do that without you." "You can," she said, "because you're the best man I've ever known." He closed his eyes, breathed deep. "And one more thing," she whispered. He turned back to her. "If I don't make it, don't ever hate the baby. Don't blame them. They'll be the last part of me. The best part." That broke him. Harrison lowered his head to her belly and cried for the first time in years. Silent, racking sobs that shook through his shoulders like waves breaking. In the days that followed, the house became something else entirely. Ariana was placed under full bed rest. No stairs, no lifting, no stress. Lucas and Lucy didn't understand all the details, but they knew Mommy was sick. Harrison told them the truth in the only way children can bear. "She's got to rest, because your baby brother or sister needs her to be extra strong." Lucy cried anyway. Lucas sat quietly, asking no questions. And every night, Harrison read to them alone. Every night, Ariana laid awake, her hand over her belly, counting kicks and trying not to count hours. Every night, the hallway light stayed on just a little longer than it used to. One afternoon, as the rain tapped against the windows like it had nowhere else to be, Harrison sat beside Ariana again, her hand in his, her skin pale but warm. "You still scared?" she asked, her voice barely above a hum. "Terrified," he said, "but you're here. Always." She turned her head, her smile faint but real. "Then I'll be okay." They didn't know what would happen next. There were still weeks ahead. Checkups, tests, decisions too cruel for people who'd already been through enough. But for now, they held hands. They breathed in unison. They whispered small prayers under their breath. Because even in the eye of the storm, love refused to leave. The morning came before the light did. It was just after 5 when Harrison's phone buzzed beside the bed. He didn't need the words. The tone of the call, the hospital name lighting up the screen, that was enough. He turned to Ariana, her eyes already open. "It's time," she whispered. The ride to the hospital was near silent. Outside, the world was still wrapped in the hush of early dawn. The trees were bare, the sidewalks slick with last night's frost. Inside the car, Harrison kept one hand on the wheel, the other clasped tightly around Ariana's. He kept his eyes on the road, but his heart never left her. Ariana stared out the window, one hand resting on her belly. Her breaths were slow and deep, but her face betrayed the tremble under the calm. Neither of them spoke. Words had lost their power in these moments. Only touch remained. At the hospital, everything moved faster than expected. The nurses met them at the entrance, already briefed. Ariana was wheeled back to prep, her chart in hand, doctors murmuring in soft, urgent voices. Harrison followed as far as they let him. Then they stopped him at the double doors. "Mr. Ford, we'll update you as soon as we can," the nurse said gently. He nodded, but he didn't move. He stood there, frozen, staring through the glass as Ariana disappeared behind a flurry of white coats and green scrubs. And then the door clicked shut. The waiting room felt colder than any place he'd ever known. Lucas and Lucy were at home, asleep under Mrs. Dalton's watchful eye. Harrison had kissed them both goodbye earlier that morning, brushing a hand over each small head, whispering promises he wasn't sure he had the strength to keep. Now, he sat alone, hunched forward in a vinyl chair that squeaked when he shifted, Ariana's old knit scarf clutched in his fists. The one she'd worn the day he found her in the cold. The same scarf she'd refused to throw out, even after it frayed at the edges. He pressed it to his lips. "Please," he whispered into the wool, "just bring them back." The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. 1 hour passed, then 2. By the 3rd, his legs had gone numb. His mouth was dry. He hadn't moved, not even to stand. Then finally, the door opened, and the doctor stepped through. Harrison stood so fast the chair clattered behind him. His knees threatened to give, but he held still, searching the man's face for something, anything. And then the doctor smiled. "Ariana's stable," he said. "The baby's breathing on their own. It was a high-risk delivery, but they're both safe." Harrison didn't hear anything after that. His legs gave out anyway. But this time, it was from relief. They let him see her an hour later. The room was dim. The blinds pulled down halfway. Machines beeped quietly. The air smelled of antiseptic and something softer, like lavender and warmth. Ariana was asleep, face pale, lips dry, but her chest rose and fell in slow, steady rhythm. Her hand twitched at her side. In the chair beside her bed, wrapped in a soft hospital blanket, lay the tiniest person Harrison had ever seen. He stepped closer, careful not to breathe too loud. The baby's eyes were closed, little fists balled near its face, a faint blush blooming on soft cheeks. He sat down slowly. For a long moment, He just watched. Then he reached out and touched the back of the baby's hand with one finger. It curled around him like it had always known him. "Hey there," he whispered, voice cracking. "Welcome to the world." He blinked against the tears gathering in his eyes. "You're here," he said, brushing a thumb under the baby's chin. "You made it. And your mama, she's the strongest woman I know." The baby stirred slightly, lips parting in a sleepy sigh. He leaned back, wiped his face with the edge of Ariana's scarf. Then her voice reached him. Does he look like me?" He turned fast. She was still weak, eyes half open but smiling. "You're awake," he said, moving to her side. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck," she murmured, smiling wider. "But I'm here." "You are," he nodded, eyes shining. "You're both here." He brought the baby to her slowly, letting her cradle him against her chest. She cried the moment their skin touched. "Hi, sweet thing," she whispered to the baby. "You're a miracle, you know that?" Harrison rested a hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into him. They didn't say much more. They didn't have to. Their tears said everything. Later that afternoon, Lucas and Lucy arrived. Lucy was bouncing with nervous energy, holding a bouquet of crayons and a card she'd drawn herself. Lucas clutched a small stuffed elephant they'd picked out from the gift shop. When they walked into the room and saw their mother, alive and smiling, their steps slowed. Ariana opened her arms. "Come here, babies." They rushed to her, careful but eager, burying their faces in the blanket near her sides. Ariana kissed the top of each head, one arm still gently cradling their new sibling. Harrison watched from the doorway, hand in his pocket, heart full to the brim. He had thought he knew what miracles looked like. Turns out, they looked just like this. A tired woman with eyes full of love, 2 children wrapped in her arms, and a baby, tiny, quiet, alive, tucked between them. That evening, as dusk settled outside and the hallway lights dimmed, Ariana turned to Harrison, her voice low. "We made it." He nodded. "We did." "Thank you," she said. He kissed her forehead, resting his lips there longer than he meant to. "No," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up, for coming back to me." She smiled, tired and beautiful. "You kept me here." He looked down at the baby in her arms. "I think maybe they did." The world outside kept turning, but inside the little house with the soft green nursery and sunlight pooling across the floors, time moved slower, softer. In the days that followed the delivery, the rhythm of life shifted. Mornings started with baby cries, tiny fists waving through the early light. Harrison had taken to waking before the sun, brewing coffee quietly and checking on Ariana before she even stirred. He walked softer, spoke quieter, as if loudness might shatter the fragile magic they'd earned through so much pain. Ariana, still healing, spent most of her time in bed or in the rocker by the window. Her body was tired, beyond tired, but her heart was strangely full. She watched the baby sleep with a kind of reverence, eyes tracing every breath, every twitch of a finger, every flutter of lashes. There were nights she held him long after he'd drifted off, not because he needed her, but because she needed him. The baby had no name just yet, not officially. But to Ariana, he would always be Miracle, even if they later named him something more traditional. Harrison never left her side for long. He helped with everything, from changing diapers and learning to warm bottles, to carefully adjusting Ariana's pillows when she winced from the stitches. He didn't hover, but he was there, always within reach, always ready. One night, as she tried to ease herself from the bed to soothe the crying baby, Harrison stepped in with gentle hands and a firm shake of the head. "I've got him," he murmured. "Rest, please." She didn't argue. Instead, she watched him cradle the baby to his chest, humming a low, wordless tune as he rocked slowly by the window. There was something about the way he looked down at the child, as if afraid to blink too long and miss something sacred. And maybe he was. Maybe they both were, because after coming so close to losing it all, every quiet moment felt like a thread holding them together. As the days stretched into weeks, Ariana began writing again. Not for work, not for therapy, but for something deeper. Each afternoon, when the house was still and the baby lay curled in her lap or napping in his bassinet, she opened a weathered notebook and began to write letters. Not long, not elaborate, just fragments of thought, memories, truths, small miracles. One for Lucas, one for Lucy, one for Miracle. She wrote about the night she left home, about sleeping in shelters, about missing birthdays because she couldn't afford a bus ticket. But she also wrote about courage and about finding hope in unexpected places, about a man who showed up when she had nothing left to believe in, about how they all became family, not because of blood, but because of love. "Someday," she whispered one afternoon, her pen paused mid-page, "they'll read these and know I never gave up on them. Not for a second." Harrison didn't read the pages. He never asked. But he knew they existed, stacked neatly by the windowsill, her handwriting curling across them like ivy. Instead, he turned his attention to something else, a plan. He called in favors from old friends, people who'd stood by him before the world knew his name. He ordered fresh linens and hung paper lanterns from the trees in the backyard. He even let Lucy choose the music, mostly soft piano and one or two fairy tale songs she insisted made things feel more magical. It wasn't a celebration for show. It was for them. Just close friends, neighbors who brought over casseroles when Ariana had been in the hospital, the midwife who'd stayed after her shift to make sure the baby latched properly, and Mrs. Dalton, who cried when she held Miracle for the first time and whispered, "I prayed for this child every night." They didn't call it a christening or a party, just a gathering, a thank you to life for not giving up on them. The sun was beginning to set when the guests arrived. The backyard had never looked more peaceful. Light filtered through the trees, catching on soft white curtains tied to the porch beams. Candles flickered in mason jars set along the table. The air smelled faintly of wildflowers and lemon cake. Ariana, dressed in a pale blue dress that swayed gently in the breeze, stood by the garden path with Miracle in her arms. Harrison hovered nearby, his hand occasionally brushing hers, not holding, but always close. Lucas and Lucy darted between guests, their laughter skipping across the lawn like stones over a pond. Every so often, they'd run back to check on their baby brother, kiss his forehead, then race off again with sticky fingers and bare feet. There were no speeches, no grand toasts, only quiet joy, only presence. Later, when the stars had started to peek through the evening sky, Ariana sat beneath the old oak tree with Miracle asleep against her chest. The soft hum of voices faded into background music as the wind rustled through the branches above. Harrison joined her there, crouching beside her in the grass, his jacket draped over her legs. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, smiling. "I feel like I'm watching someone else's life, like all this can't possibly belong to me." He looked at her for a long time, then took her hand gently in his. "It does," he said. "Every bit of it." She looked out at the yard, at Lucy showing her drawing to Mrs. Dalton, at Lucas climbing up the tree swing, at the lanterns swaying in the wind, and let the truth of his words settle deep inside her. "I've been given a second life," she whispered. Harrison leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "No," he said softly. "You built one." That night, after the last guest had left and the children were asleep, Harrison found Ariana out on the porch. She was wrapped in one of his old cardigans, the baby monitor resting beside her. He sat beside her, letting the quiet settle. "Do you ever miss the old days?" she asked suddenly. He tilted his head. You mean when the house was silent and I ate alone every night? She laughed gently. Yeah, that. No, not for a second. She looked down at her hands, then out into the dark. I used to think love meant rescue, she said, like someone would come in and fix everything, but now I know better. He waited. She turned toward him, her expression calm. Love is staying, she said. It's folding baby laundry and running the dishwasher and wading through the worst storms just to see one smile. It's not saving someone. It's walking with them through the fire. He reached for her hand again. I'll keep walking, he said. Wherever you go. Spring turned quietly to summer, and with it came a sense of rhythm Ariana hadn't felt in years. The kind that didn't rush, the kind that settled deep. She returned to work 3 months after Miracle was born, not out of necessity, but out of choice. Harrison had offered her a flexible role on one of his smaller project teams, nothing too fast-paced, nothing too heavy. We go at your pace, he'd said, and he meant it. She wasn't the same woman who once looked down when people passed her on the sidewalk. She walked into the office now with her shoulders back, eyes steady, and a small smile playing at her lips. Her coworkers respected her, not just because she bore Harrison's name, but because she earned it. Meeting deadlines, offering insight, managing chaos with a quiet kind of grace. At home, everything had its rhythm, too. Morning started with cartoons playing softly in the background, cereal bowls clinking, and the sound of little feet running down the hallway. Ariana would stand by the kitchen window, sipping her coffee while Harrison packed school lunches with Lucy supervising like a tiny foreman. Sometimes, all it took was a glance across the table, a soft hand brushing her back as he passed. Their love didn't need a spotlight. It lived in the calm, in the shared breath of ordinary days. Lucas and Lucy had grown into themselves, thoughtful, kind, always asking questions. They called Harrison Dad now. Not because anyone told them to, but because one day Lucy had said it by accident, and no one corrected her. The name simply stayed. Miracle was crawling, babbling, and already showing signs of having inherited Ariana's quiet strength and Harrison's calm steadiness. The baby brought a new layer of joy into the home. Chaotic, sleepless joy, but joy nonetheless. One golden evening, the family sat together in the backyard, the same bench beneath the oak tree, worn a little more now, but still strong. Lucas and Lucy were chasing bubbles. Miracle was nestled on a blanket, wide-eyed, reaching for the air. Ariana leaned into Harrison's shoulder, her head resting there like it belonged. His arm wrapped around her, steady as ever. She watched the children, watched the light filter through the leaves, watched love move across the yard like a gentle breeze. And for the first time in forever, she didn't think about the dark days. She didn't need to, because they were behind her now. Every piece of her past, the pain, the fear, the ache, it all had a place, but it no longer held her. She was no longer surviving. She was living. And love, simple, everyday, ordinary love, had been the light all along. This story is a deeply moving portrait of healing, resilience, and love, found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet choices made every day. Ariana's journey from a woman abandoned and broken to one who stands with dignity, grace, and strength is nothing short of remarkable. Her transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, painful, and incredibly real. We see her stumble, we see her doubt, but most importantly, we see her rise. What makes this story truly powerful is its emotional honesty. It doesn't shy away from the darkness, homelessness, abandonment, the fear of death, but instead uses it to highlight the strength of the human spirit. Harrison's quiet, unwavering presence becomes the foundation upon which a new family is built, showing that love is not about fixing someone, but standing beside them through every storm. The most profound lesson lies in the quiet resilience of motherhood, the healing power of love, and the belief that even the most broken hearts can find their way back to light. It teaches us that no pain is wasted if we use it to grow, and no past too dark to bloom from. If only we choose to stay, choose to love, and choose to begin again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.